It's difficult to argue with the idea that humans dominate the planet. Consider what we have done, collectively. We are the apex predator despite our having no great speed and no morphological features that give us advanced ability to kill. At the local and regional level, we have modified landscapes sufficiently to remove habitat for many species. At the global scale, we have put such an enormous volume of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that we threaten the continued existence of many species, including ours. Our planetary home is amid abrupt, irreversible climate change, an event unprecedented in planetary history. These actions result largely from our large brains. Yet the question persists in large-brained scientific circles. Why do humans dominate? Humans love to ponder their own domination of nature. What is open-ended culture? Humans are considered to have an open-ended culture, meaning that, unlike most animal cultures, human culture can continuously evolve and adapt without reaching a fixed limit, allowing for ongoing innovation and development of new ideas and practices. Unfortunately, this means that humans can adopt destructive practices, quote, without reaching a fixed limit, end quote. But let's see what the big-brained folks have to say about our power. The lead for an article published at phys.org on November 7, 2024, poses the question, quote, why is human culture, the shared body of knowledge passed down across generations, so much more powerful than animal cultures? End quote. The title of the article is Evolutionary Anthropologist Presents Hypothesis About Why Humans Are Dominating the World Over Other Animals. I appreciate the title's recognition that humans are animals. Quote, why humans are dominating the world over other animals, end quote. The second paragraph of the article at phys.org, after the question about human culture, asks the relevant question, quote, what's special about our species, end quote. What's special about our species? Humans are relentless in our consumption of the natural world. Renewable or not, we must forever scheme how to obtain more of everything. This mentality leaves little room for songwriting as practiced by whales, or altruistic behaviors such as those practiced by our close cousins, bonobos. Whales and bonobos are cumulative cultures. Again, what is open-ended culture? Humans are considered to have an open-ended culture, meaning that unlike most animal cultures, human culture can continuously evolve and adapt without reaching a fixed limit, allowing for ongoing innovation and development of new ideas and practices. Unfortunately, this means that humans can adopt destructive practices, quote, without reaching a fixed limit, end quote. But let's see what the big brain folks have to say about our power. The question is addressed by two scholars in a peer-reviewed paper published in the renowned Nature series of publications. Published November 7, 2024, the paper is titled, Human Culture is Uniquely Open-Ended Rather than Uniquely Cumulative. It was published in Nature Human Behavior. I recognize that the language used in this peer-reviewed paper can be a little daunting to those of us who are not anthropologists. Still, I believe it is worth the effort to persevere. The abstract tells much of the story. Quote, theories of how humans came to be so ecologically dominant increasingly center on the adaptive abilities of human culture and its capacity for cumulative change and high-fidelity transmission. Here we revisit this hypothesis by comparing human culture with animal cultures and cases of epigenetic inheritance and parental effects. We first conclude that cumulative culture and high transmission fidelity are not unique to human culture as previously thought, and so they are unlikely to explain its adaptive qualities. We then evaluate the evidence for 7 alternative explanations: the inheritance of acquired characters, the pathways of inheritance, the non-random generation of variation, the scope of heritable variation, effects on organismal fitness, effects on genetic fitness, and effects on evolutionary dynamics. From these, we identify the open-ended scope of human cultural variation as a key, but generally neglected phenomenon. We end by articulating a hypothesis for the cognitive basis of this open-endedness, end quote. A couple of definitions seem warranted. First, cumulative change refers to relatively slow, gradual change. Second, High fidelity transmission refers to the ability to transmit genetic material from one generation to the next with little or no loss of physical or behavioral efficacy. Unfortunately, this abstract fails to reveal the hypothesis derived in this peer-reviewed paper, which is not open access. My emeritus status allows access, and I quote from the discussion, which relies on many other peer-reviewed papers. Quote, "We have reviewed a wide range of factors to identify how human culture differs from animal cultures and from other modes of non-genetic inheritance. Specifically, we first argued that cumulative change and transmission stability are not as characteristic of human culture as previously suggested, and so are unlikely to explain the adaptive propensity of human culture. We then considered a range of other hypotheses. In most cases, human culture exhibits similar properties to animal cultures and other forms of non-genetic inheritance. However, the most distinctive feature of human culture, which has hitherto been relatively unexplored, is its comparatively open-ended capacity for generating heritable variation. That is, many modes of inheritance involve the stable transmission of non-random acquired variation that accumulates over time and flows along non-vertical pathways. However, these modes are typically limited to particular kinds of variation, such as songs or antibodies, or those that are supported by the regulation of existing genetic variation. However, these modes are typically limited to particular kinds of variation, such as songs or antibodies, or those that are supported by the regulation of existing genetic variation. Indeed, the scopes of epigenetic inheritance and parental effects are sufficiently dependent on available genetic variation that novel heritable traits usually depend on genetic change. For instance, epigenetic factors typically switch between previously evolved alternatives, be they desert locust morphs, Daphnia helmets, or wild radish trichome density. By contrast, human culture is much less constrained and can be characterized as open-ended." End quote. The paper then goes on to provide supporting information from many other published peer-reviewed papers. Quote, "Although we suggest that the broad scope of human culture has been underexplored, some studies have identified open-endedness as an important factor. For instance, it has been suggested that although animal cultures can cumulatively increase the efficiency with which they exploit natural phenomena, only human cumulative culture is able to expand to exploit new phenomena. Other work has explored how human culture is enhanced by recombination and the ability to avoid getting stuck at local optima. Although such work does not evaluate alternative hypotheses or draw on literature concerning epigenetic inheritance or parental effects, it is nonetheless consistent with our position that open-endedness, as opposed to cumulativity or stability, is the key distinction between human and animal cultures, as well as other modes of genetic inheritance." How best to assess cultural open-endedness across species? One approach is to map out the scope of inheritance systems through long-term observations and by testing what can or cannot be transmitted. However, such a top-down approach is likely to be extremely time-consuming given the variety of cultural traits and the potentially slow pace of cultural change. Instead, we suggest a bottom-up approach in which how inheritance systems store information is used to understand and predict the kinds of variation they can support. That is, we suggest drawing on cognitive science to inform our understanding of the limits of cultural inheritance. For instance, differences between the scope of human culture and that of animal cultures and other modes of non-genetic inheritance may result from how individuals mentally represent actions and their goals. It is well established that complex action sequences are represented hierarchically. That is, an overarching goal is broken into a series of sub-goals, each of which can consist of its own series of steps, sub-steps, and so on. Such a system uses working memory resources more efficiently than non-hierarchical representations. This approach has been used to describe dust bathing in birds, nettle folding in gorilla foraging, human memory of short stories, and how humans sort items. In particular, the songs of humpback whales, which evolve cumulatively in their complexity, are hierarchically composed of themes and smaller phrases. Such cumulatively evolving animal vocalizations may prove a useful model system for the role of hierarchical representation in cultural change." End quote. The discussion section goes on to provide additional supporting information and a few examples. Quote, "A system for the hierarchical representation of actions can differ across species in a multitude of different ways that can be identified both behaviorally and neurologically. For instance, given that they support working memory, effective representations can be detected by improved performance when hierarchical representations are possible. Cross-species work could also assess the number of nested levels that can be represented, the maximum number of steps at any level, the ability to adjust plans when a particular step fails, how long representations can be held in working memory, and the accuracy of representations constructed through observation. In particular, the open-ended cumulative evolution of hierarchical songs, but not other behaviors, in whales and songbirds may prove a useful entry. All this work would contribute to a cognitive basis for the causes of culture in humans and other species, as well as why our species is uniquely cultural and our culture so adaptive. Nonetheless, such considerations have been hindered by strong emphases on cultural change and transmission stability as the distinctive features of human culture. Whether our particular hypothesis is correct or not, we suggest that such emphases may no longer be warranted, and that greater insight may be gained by considering alternative explanations for the unique adaptiveness of human culture." End quote. I greatly appreciate the humility in this final sentence. Quote, "Whether our particular hypothesis is correct or not." End quote. Pointing the way to greater insight is also a great idea. Why humans dominate other organisms is a critical issue. However, I doubt we have time to determine the definitive answer to this and many other important questions.